So, Julio, there's this story I tell in the page of our estimation course, Master Market Sizing, about when I was preparing for the first time to apply to consulting firms. And it's an interesting story because I completely underestimated estimation questions. And that cost me 3 offers, including at McKinsey, at BCG. And in McKinsey, it was like at a final round. So it was my last chance to get a consulting offer that year. It was at McKinsey, and I failed because of estimations. Now, the interesting part is I was very well prepared for all the complex cases, right? All the things that people fear.
What do you mean?
Like verticalization, M&A between different types of companies in different markets, private equity cases. And I was prepared for those, but I didn't give much attention to estimations, right? I thought it was a beginner thing.
Yeah.
And I failed because of that. Now, on the second time I prepared, when I got offers at McKinsey and Bain, I obviously was very well prepared for estimations because I learned from my mistakes. And again, I got estimation questions at McKinsey and at Bain final rounds. And actually, the Bain final round estimation question I got there is in our Master Market Sizing course. And it's also the one that we put in the free course, in the estimation module of the free course, as an example of a partner level estimation. But I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to bring this episode of 9 common market sizing mistakes that people make and how to avoid them, so that people can learn from these mistakes and not do them in their interviews. And hopefully we can save some candidates from losing great offers, great job opportunities at the last minute because they didn't give much thought to it. Now, obviously, we won't teach you how to do estimations here because this is a podcast episode. But you can learn a lot from the estimations module in the free course, and if you want to go deeper, in the Master Market Sizing course.
All right. Just a quick note. If they want to learn about estimations in the free course, they can just go to craftingcases.com/course.
Yeah.
Sign up to the free course. The first module is on case interviews, mindsets, and the method. The second module is on estimations already.
Yeah, and then you have the 5 steps to solve an estimation question, and then 3 drills, right?
I think so.
Yeah, 3 drills of different levels of difficulty and of different types of estimation, so you can get your mind around it.
Okay.
But yeah, so we have 9 common market sizing mistakes. I know you brought some, I brought some as well.
Yeah.
And I want to start out with the first common mistake that I see people making, which is following set rules that work for all estimation cases, which means they work for all the repetitive cases that people get, because most estimations you see in the wild, especially on prep materials, not in real interviews, but in prep materials, they mostly fall into some common types, and then you get prepared for those and you think that you're covered for all of the estimations, while in the real world, most estimations are different from those. So one quick example is consumer goods estimations, like estimate the market size for bubblegum, or for tires, or for cars, or for bicycles in a country.
In my experience, all mock interviews that you're going to do with random people on the internet, if they are estimations, they're going to be consumer goods. At best, they're going to be long-term goods that last a long time.
Durable goods.
Yeah, right.
And once in a while, you get like how many hairdressers are there in, I don't know, in Germany. And then it's not a consumer good. It's a little bit harder. It's the 3rd type of estimation that we teach in the market sizing course out of 5. But even then, it's like hairdressers. You never get one that's harder than that. Like how many neurosurgeons there are.
Yeah.
And even though it's kind of the same thing, it's way harder to do neurosurgeons.
Now, a quick question. What are those rules? What do you mean by set rules?
Okay, so if you if you go into casing points or if you go into most articles you see online or videos, and even some paid courses, they'll say, oh, estimations are easy. You just get the population and then you segment it somehow, and then they give a couple examples that sometimes work, sometimes don't. Like segment by age or by usage or by geography or by gender, and and then go on from there.
Yeah.
Like they don't give much detail, but they say get the population, see how much each person consumes. And that works wonders for bubblegum. Like you have, bubblegum, you have children, you have adults.
Yeah.
And then children consume differently than adults. And then you just have to figure out how many people in that population are children, how many are not children, and how much bubblegum they eat, right?
Yeah.
They consume per week or per month or per year, and then the price per gum. So that's one example.
I can see how that dynamic plays out. So you learn that silly rule, and then you go do mock interviews with random people on the internet, and then you get a bubblegum case, a dog food estimation case, and a, Snickers case. And then you estimate all of them. The rule works in all of them. You feel like you're the man in estimations, so you move on to M&A cases because you think that that's what's going to be in your interviews.
Yeah, and these are great to start with because they're simple. They're the simplest type of case you'll ever find, like a simple estimation. And they can help you with ones that are a little bit harder, like how many hairdressers are there? Oh, people cut hair, so what's the population? How many people get haircuts? And it doesn't really solve, but then you can kind of figure your way out to get to the number of hairdressers. But if you get a tougher one, like the one I got at the Bain final round that you find in our free course, it's to estimate the how many people should work in a call center for a luxury car manufacturer. And good luck using population for that. Like, can you get there from population? Yeah, but there's like 15 steps after that. So it doesn't really help that much. And I think that's the first mistake. It's like seeing those people even use the term guesstimate online. So if you look like, oh, market sizing question examples, and you go to like most websites, they'll show you like how many golf balls fit in a 747.
Yeah.
What's the market size for pet food? And like, silly things like that are good to give a basic example, but they don't work for most interviews, and they certainly don't work for tier 1 consulting firms, especially at final round. So I think that's the first mistake, is like, these are simple examples for our beginners to know what you're talking about. They're not what you should be preparing for. I mean, you can prepare for them, but you need to prepare further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. Let me bring in the common mistake number 2.
All right.
And that is something that is very funny when it happens if you're not being interviewed.
Yeah.
That is locking yourself into terrible math alleys.
Okay.
So when you're doing an estimation, you're most of the times, you're essentially the one choosing the assumptions.
Right. The numbers to multiply and divide.
Yeah. So like you do the structure for the bubblegum consumption, right? And you get to, you'll segment the population, and adults will consume, 3 pieces of gum every week, and children will consume 10 or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you do a weighted average and etc. And you're going to get to a number. And if you can't take a structured view at those numbers, or at least a systemic view at those numbers, you might end up with something like dividing 110 by 27. And that's roughly 4. That's going to take you a while to do the math. Now, if you were a little bit wiser, you would choose 125.
Right.
Because that's obviously 4. The number doesn't change much. And honestly, those assumptions weren't really precise to begin with, so there's no reason to choose such a bad number as 27 or 110.
So what you mean by locking yourself into bad math alleys, it's choosing numbers that don't work well with one another.
With one another, yeah. Without without damage to the final number, you could choose numbers that do work well with each other.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see this a lot with people who segment too much. So let's get the bubblegum example again. They segment by, for example, by age, like children and non-children. They consume differently. But then they'll also do for each of those a segmentation of like people who consume a little bit, a lot, and every day. I just freestyled it, but you could have precise things like, people who consume 1 gum a week or 3 a week or like 3 a day, let's say. And then they put assumptions into that. And then you have to do a weighted average. So like how many people are in the first group, and this is the average consumption.
Yeah.
And then the second group and so on. And then the result of this weighted average, it's like 1.22 packs per week for children and 0.78 for adults. And it sounds very precise, but it just made it all up, right?
Yeah.
So you could have used easier to work numbers so that they're round, or at least they divide and multiply well with one another. So I think that's one instance where that happens. And a different instance where I see that happening is, and this is a little bit more sophisticated. So let's say you could use 6 or 7 for an assumption.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say people who are heavy consumers of bubblegum, they do 6 gums a week, or you could have used 7, right? If you're, let's say, more green in solving cases, you might pick 7 because it fits nicely with the week. It's 1 a week. It's 1 per day.
Yeah.
And such. But 7 is a prime number, and if you have to divide that later in your estimation, and I don't think that happens with bubblegum because it's all multiplication, but if you had to divide something by 7 later, it's way harder than dividing something by 6.
Yeah.
Because 7 is prime, it doesn't divide well. 6 is divisible by 2, by 3.
Yeah, unless you want to use consumption by day, then 7 every week is a good idea.
Right, because then it's 1 per day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some nuances that you pick up when you do a lot of them.
Yeah, and then you can look at the numbers as a whole. Like, take the 7 example. If you were to multiply 4.5 by 7, you're going to take a few seconds to figure out that it's 31.5. But if you were to multiply 5 by 6, which is
30.
almost the same thing, you'll get 30. You'll get 30 instantly. You won't get confused at all.
And it doesn't change the answer by more than the error that's already embedded into your assumption.
Exactly.
So the interviewer doesn't care.
Exactly. So when choosing your assumptions, remember to choose numbers that will help you rather than numbers that sound precise because of your logic, but don't forget that they're just made up.
Yeah, there's a small mindset thing here. A lot of people want to use hard numbers because it sounds more precise. And then it sounds like you're more sophisticated. But your interviewer can see through it. It's an estimation. It's not a precise math operation, right? So they can see through it, and you just look silly if you're doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I mean, but it takes away mental energy that you could use later on the interview. It adds some risk because you may make a math mistake here because it's harder to compute. And no big deal on that. I mean, you can make math mistakes, but then if you've just started your interview and you made a math mistake, it may put your mind in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And then you're a little bit more anxious, and these things add up, right?
Yeah.
There's some emotional management in a case interview that you don't want to, on purpose, put things that leave you anxious because you may derail a harder thing later that actually matters because you're anxious, you're tired,
Yeah, makes sense. Especially when you have more than one interview in a day, which is common.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's move on to mistake number 3.
Mistake number 3 is similar to yours, but it's locking yourself up into a bad structure. Okay, so for every estimation, there may be, and there usually are, several ways to structure that estimation. And some structures are better than others, and some structures are just bad. And this is a little bit more serious than the Math Alley thing. Like you can deal with numbers that are difficult to deal with, and it may take some mental toll, but that's fine. It's just more energy and a little bit more risk involved. But a bad structure can derail the whole estimation. So I got a couple of examples here. The main one is what we call the aggregator fallacy. So we teach that in the market sizing course. But it basically is misattributing the driver, the cause for the number, into something that looks like the cause for the number. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, I'll give a couple examples. Okay, so let's say you want to estimate the number of hairdressers in Berlin.
Yeah. Okay.
What most people will do is say, okay, that's easy. I just need the number of hair salons and multiply that by the number of hairdressers per salon.
Okay. Numerically, that sounds like it makes sense.
It mathematically works. Now, the problem is, how do you get to the number of hair salons?
Sounds harder than getting to the number of hairdressers.
Exactly. And there's another problem with that. Let's say, I'll give a silly example, okay? Let's say you're in Soviet Russia. Maybe there's one hair salon in Moscow, and you have to go through a huge line to go to that hair salon. Does that mean that they have less hairdressers there? Well, maybe because it's Soviet Russia, and I don't know how these types of services work there. But let me give a better example. Let's say two countries with cities, like two big cities with 10 million people in two different countries with the same level of income, same behavior towards cutting hair and going to hairdressers. So they should have the same number of hairdressers, given that productivity is the same, demand is the same. But let's say that for cultural reasons or for the way that rent is charged in the country or something like that, in one country you have tiny salons like one man or two man operations. Yeah. And in another country, you tend to have a more consolidated industry where there's like one salon with like 15 professionals working. The number of hairdressers is going to be the same because demand is the same, productivity is the same, consumption habits is the same.
Right. So what you mean to misattributing the driver is actually people cutting hair and not the number of hair salons.
Yeah. And not exactly, because you can have 1,000 hairdressers in a city and they each have their own one-man operation, or you can have 1,000 hairdressers in a city and you have like 50 salons with 20 professionals each. Yeah. And if you go towards if you use the main driver as the number of hairdressers, the number of salons, which is what you're implying when you do this structure, you're committing the aggregator fallacy. And why do we call it that way? It's a fallacy to think that the aggregator of professionals is the driver of the number of professionals. So professionals, hairdressers aggregate in salons, but the way they aggregate, if it's like 2 people per salon or 20 or 100, or maybe every hairdresser in the city in Soviet Russia, in our hypothetical example, it doesn't change the number of professionals. Right. So you're just putting yourself into a corner where because you didn't structure the number of hairdressers through a primary driver or a primary cause of the number of hairdressers, you're making your life difficult, right?
Right. This is a question that I get a lot from the free course, because in the free course we have one drill where we ask candidates to estimate the number of personal trainers in whatever city.
It's in London, I think.
Okay. And I get people asking me all the time, oh, my structure was different. I had the number of gyms times the number of personal trainers in gyms. So now this is the answer to their questioning. Is that okay? And no, that's not okay. Exactly because of the aggregator fallacy.
Yeah, and there's an additional reason to that, because a lot of personal trainers don't work in gyms, right?
True.
And you could say that for hairdressers, but I think the ratio is smaller. Yeah. Because you need equipment and so on. But yeah, like how many gyms are there in London? It's harder to estimate than the number of personal trainers, because then you have to know the average size of a gym in London. And then even if you're a Londoner, your experience doesn't count that much, because the gym that you go to or the gyms that you've gone to may be drastically different from the actual average gym in the city. Maybe because of the neighborhood you live in, or because of the type of gym that you like, right?
Okay.
Some people like big gyms, some people like small niche boutique, whatever.
So other than the aggregator fallacy, are there other ways of locking yourself up into a bad structure?
Yeah, the other one, and this includes many of the examples in the aggregator fallacy, is having a structure where one of the primary assumptions is harder to estimate than the estimation itself.
Okay.
So these two examples are good because hairdressers, it's easier to estimate the demand and productivity of hairdressers. So how many cuts, and I'm simplifying because they do other services as well, but how many haircuts there will be in a month, and how many one hairdresser can do per month. That's easier to estimate than the average number of hairdressers in the average salon, right?
Yeah.
So that's one example. And I think most aggregator fallacies examples fall into that. But let me think of another example of when the assumption is harder to estimate than the estimation itself. Let's say, can you think of an example?
Yes. So one way that I've seen people try to estimate the number of personal trainers in London is by the number of personal trainers that are graduating each year from whatever training that they have, and the number that are leaving the market, retiring every year. And they'll use that and the history of that to get to the number of personal trainers that exist
like
today.
New professionals minus retiring professionals, and then you accumulate that throughout the average career time.
So those are terrible assumptions to find, and it's going to get you to a worse answer. So you're better off going back to the first question, how many personal trainers are there, and trying to structure it another way.
Yeah, I think the reason why people make this mistake is for the aggregator fallacy specifically is because it's very visible.
Yeah.
Like how many hairdressers? Well, how hairdressers are in hair salons, so it's very visible. And then it's easier to work with. But the other mistake, the more general pattern, which includes the example that you just used, is that these structures are mathematically correct if you do them well.
Yeah.
And they think estimations are a math test, but it's more of a test of being pragmatic, right? So there are several ways to solve this estimation that are mathematically correct. Which one is pragmatic enough that you can use without using Google, without knowing data, to reach a reasonable number? And some of them are way more pragmatic than others.
That's a good point. I do want to bring a caveat to this common mistake. This is something that you can use if you're an advanced candidate. Let's say you've gone through master market sizing and you feel comfortable creating several structures for any type of problem. Then you can use structural problems like the aggregator fallacy to your advantage. So let's say they get one of these cases, they can tell the interviewer there's one path that's this one, through gyms or through hair salons. But this will only work if you have the number of hair salons and the average size. Or you have the number of gyms and average size and percentage of personal trainers that don't work in gyms or whatever. So you can go through those paths, but letting the interviewer know that they'll only work if they have those specific numbers that they know that they can't find.
Yeah, even better. You can differentiate yourself if you know of this. By giving two paths, one bad one that everyone uses and one good one that you intend to use. And then you can show the interviewer, hey, so I think this one is very obvious. Like I can see the number of gyms and get the number of personal trainers through that. But this has lots of problems. You can't find the number of, how can I find the number of gyms? And personal trainers also work at people's homes. And then there's this other path, which is better, which you can see on the free course because we have this exact drill there. And this path is better. And what you're showing the interviewer is, hey, like you're implying to the interviewer that, hey, everyone's using this path. And it's not a good one. So I'm going to give you a better one. And then you instantly differentiate yourself.
Yeah, that's something that I did in one of my Bain interviews, actually.
Oh, yeah. Was it with the
diagnostics?
Yeah.
Diagnostics.
Lab tests case, yeah.
Yeah, medical diagnostics in Brazil, market sizing. And I told the interviewer that I could go a common path that would probably work, but it would be a little bit rocky because I didn't have much data. But I could divide medical diagnostics into lab tests and imaging, and then divide each of those into number of appointments and average price per appointment, and et cetera, et cetera. Or I could use something that I had and take a more indirect approach through triangulations. So my parents have a small medical imaging diagnostics clinic, and I could use the data that I had from that to derive everything else. And I showed them a few paths that I could take, and that would only work with several assumptions. I would need help from them, and given that I had the data from my parents' clinic, some of which I made up. Sorry, Kai. But,
Kai was your interviewer.
Yeah. But it worked. And
but he
loved
believed
it.
He believed you because you had this industry experience through your family.
Yeah, and I guess in a sense it doesn't matter.
Right.
Like the numbers some of them might have been made up, but they made sense because he worked in that industry a lot.
Well, that's true.
He'd done a lot of projects. So if it didn't make sense, he'd call me out.
Right.
Or at least reject me.
Yeah. So in this case, I would say that you were uniquely positioned to use that type of structure for that case. Most people would fail, but you had the industry knowledge, so it worked.
The key thing is not only that I had the data, but that I showed him that I could take two different ways, and he actually chose the second one. If he didn't want to see that, or if he didn't care for that, he just wanted the simple one, he would have said it.
Right.
But he knew right then that I could do it in two different ways. What that showed him was, in a project, this person's going to have two different paths, and a client might have a set of data that we don't know of, or one path might prove itself not working, so this person's going to have a way out.
Right.
So that showed him overall that I was going to be a resourceful consultant.
What I'm guessing too is that he may have, and I don't know him, but he may have put yourself into a tricky situation on purpose, because a lot of people, when they have the data, and you had the data for like your parents' clinic in a small market, they just use that data as if it's true, and that would have been wrong for you to do. But now what I'm guessing is that you actually corrected for the biases, and that's probably what he wanted to see when he made you choose that path.
True, and it did help that I found all the right biases, like coverage from healthcare plans, et cetera, not only for that clinic, but also for the state and for the country.
Interesting, cool. So we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but don't put yourself into a bad structure situation, because then you just need to start all over again. Yeah. And there's some cost involved. There's the time of the interview that you wasted there. Most people don't want to do this and start all over again. It's the best thing to do if you're in this situation often, but it's taxing on your emotional.
This is not necessarily a tip for when you're actually interviewing. It's a tip for when you're practicing. Like, learn to not lock yourself up into bad structures or into the aggregator fallacy. And these advanced techniques that we were just talking about, you'll only use them if you're experienced and if you're advanced. So I would say only use that after going through the master market sizing course, honestly.
Yeah.
All right. Can I move on to common mistake number 4?
Yes, please.
All right. So that is creating a bottoms-up structure. I would say that this is the most common beginner mistake. Not necessarily a mistake, but it does cause a lot of problems that can be easily fixed with a top-down structure. Let me tell you what these are.
I was going to ask you to contrast bottoms-up versus top-down.
All right, so let's take the silly bubblegum example. I'm going to use bubblegum all over this episode. And I'm also going to criticize the bubblegum example a lot, but that's because it's simpler to explain, but not a good example to practice. So let's say you want to estimate the bubblegum market. I'll start bottoms up. Okay. So I'll take the population and I'll segment the population by age. And then I'll take usage for each age and the percentage of the population that's in each age, and I'll use that to find the bubblegum consumption on average for the whole population that consumes gum. Then I'll divide that by the penetration rate or multiply it by the penetration rate, whatever. I'll get to the consumption on average, blah, 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 blah. As I'm doing this...
I already feel lost.
You already feel lost. The listener already feels lost as well.
Even though it's a simple case.
And, yeah, and you don't know that I'm going to get eventually to the bubblegum market size.
Right.
Because I am...
Until you finish the whole equation.
Exactly. If I ever do. You don't know that I'm going to. On the other hand, so this means bottoms up because you're going from the assumptions and you're jumping through hoops to get to the final answer. A top-down structure starts from the final answer. So I would say something like the total market size for bubblegum is the number of bubblegum pieces sold times the price per piece.
Right.
The number of pieces sold is the population that consumes gum times the average consumption per person that consumes gum.
Number of pieces per person per year.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So that way, from the start, you know that I'm going to get there. You might still be uncertain on whether I'm going to get to each one of those assumptions, but then I'll break them down slowly, but you already know that I'm going to get there. And this, if you go bottoms up, you will always make your interviewer anxious. They're going to have to pay attention to several things, and they're going to have to keep remembering the things that you did before to see if that made sense and if they make sense with what you're saying now. Now, if you do a top-down structure, every step is falsifiable. So they can hear your first breakdown and say, okay, this is right. So I can only focus on what he's saying right now.
Right.
Now you're saying you're breaking down the average consumption per person that consumes bubblegum into blah, blah, blah. Okay, this makes sense. Now I can forget about
This piece is correct.
Exactly.
Now let's move on to the next piece.
Exactly. And so the interviewer knows that you're going to solve the problem right away, or at least they can only focus on one part. That makes them less anxious. And
it makes you less anxious as well because
yes,
you have it all on paper and you can solve it piece by piece instead of having to like consider 8 or 10 or 15 variables that multiply and divide one another. And you're like, what does this all mean anyway?
Yeah, it does free more space in your mind to be creative and to impress your interviewer. But what I really care about is what your interviewer is going to see is that you're a person who's not going to make a client anxious.
Right.
By showing them some math problem that the client's going to be lost. And that makes them feel safe that when they get you in front of a client, you can actually explain your way through a complex problem, and you can explain your way through a model that the client, for example, doesn't trust or doesn't like.
Right.
And the client will understand and feel certain that you're doing a good job.
Yeah, one way to see this is when you use a bottom-up structure, you end up with a long equation, right? And usually, but that's usually you get a population and then you cut it through different filters and you end up with a long, like 8-variable equation that gives you the answer if you got all of these pieces right. And if it's an easy case with like 4 variables to multiply, that's fine. But the more complex it gets, the more steps you need to get to the answer. Maybe it's like 10 variables or 15 variables.
Yeah.
And it gets confusing because you haven't chunked it. So you can't look at, oh, this part is related to this concept and this part is related to this concept. Now, the opposite, the top-down structure, you usually build it as a math tree, so like an issue tree with math
operations.
Operations, yes. So, for example, bubblegum, it's number of pieces times average price per piece.
Yeah.
And this is a chunk that I can look at as a client, as an interviewer, as a candidate, as a manager, who's managing someone's work as a partner who just dropped into the room and is trying to figure out what the team is doing. You can look at this chunk and be like, okay, this chunk is correct. Let me forget about it.
Yeah.
And then you get this number of pieces per person, and then you break it down into like multiplication of 2 or 3 variables. And all you need to do to understand it is look at this chunk and see if this gives you this result. So you can, it's like that concept from learning, chunking.
Yeah.
Right? Which is get a lot of small things and chunk it into a big concept. And you're doing that in real time. And that's why it's way more clear to whoever's doing it and to whoever's listening or to whoever's seeing you do the work.
Yeah.
Because you can just analyze each chunk and see if it stands on its own versus looking at like 15 variables and be like, I don't know if this is right. Like,
yeah, and the good news is this is super easy and free to fix. I can tell you 90% of the candidates can fix this problem and start doing it right in one day just by going to a free course and taking half of the estimations module.
Yeah.
Then they'll already start being able to turn their bottoms-up structure into top-down structures right away. But without good content, without a good background, it's going to be hard to do that. So I really recommend that if you're doing this mistake, if you're using bottoms-up structure, fix this problem in one day by going to our free course, craftingcases.com/course. Go to the estimations module, watch videos number 1 and 2, forgetting the intro video where you'll see me talking about estimations, but just the theory video and the first drill.
Yeah.
That's going to solve your problem right away.
Yeah, agreed. So let's move on to the 5th common estimation or market sizing mistake, and that is making assumptions without explaining the reasoning behind them. So we've covered a little bit of structuring, right? So you have that structure, you have the variables that multiply, divide, sum one another. But now eventually you're going to need to put numbers into them. And in most estimations, you won't have data. You can ask for the data. But if it's an estimation question, they usually don't have data for most of the buckets or the little variables that you put in the formula. And you need to come up with them. Like, for example, what's the average height of a human male in the US? And you can put a number there. And it's not going to be precise, but it has to be close to the reality. Otherwise, your end result is going to be way too far off. Like if you put like the average height is like 10 meters, or it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is an easy example, but some examples are harder. For example, how much gum does the average child eat per week? That's a little harder, right?
Yeah.
And you can have even harder examples, like how, like what percentage of luxury cars owner call the call center every month? Like that's way harder. And the mistake is not giving a rationale for the number. So you can say like, oh, the average car owner calls the manufacturer's call center 3 times per year. Like, okay, like why? Like why are you saying 3? Why not 10? Why not 0.2, right?
Yeah. So yeah, in that case, regardless of whether the interviewer knows the right number or not, they are going to question you. They are going to be a little bit annoyed that you're just guessing a random number.
Even if it's right.
Even if it's right, yeah. Because, like, do you actually know that? So the reason you want to put a reasoning behind the number is because you don't want to prove to the interviewer that you know how many times a year a luxury car owner calls the call center. Right. You want to prove to them that you can get to a number for whichever assumption you find on the job. Yeah. So you want to show them that you can think through a weird assumption. One example that I have in mind is like, how long does it take to load cargo into a plane? Okay. Someone could just say 10 minutes or 1 hour because it's a lot of cargo. But someone could say, I can think that it takes X amount of time to load people into a plane. So that's the time that they have to load cargo as well. So that's the time that I'm going to use. Or maybe I'm going to cut that by half because they have less time for this and this reason. or I'm going to double that because maybe they have more time for this and this reason. Whatever. I don't care, but you're coming up with a reasoning with which your interviewer can disagree.
Right.
And that's a great thing that they can disagree with the reasoning rather than the number.
And it shows your thinking. So let's say, for instance, how long does it take to put all the luggage in a passenger plane in a regular airliner, right?
Yeah.
You could say 10 minutes, you could say 1 hour, like who knows? But the reasons show your thinking, the reasoning. So, for example, one way you could give a rationale to whatever number you put. Let's say I'll go with 15 minutes, okay?
Okay.
One way to give a rationale for it is, well, they give you, like at least here in Brazil, it's like 40 minutes before the flight takes off is the cutoff for domestic flights to give the luggage.
Yeah.
In the place that you deliver the luggage, in the check-in counter.
Yeah.
So it takes at most 40 minutes.
Right.
Otherwise, every flight would be delayed. But is that actually true? Well, maybe not, because only a few people will give the luggage last minute. So it may be a little bit more, but that's a reference. Another reference, when you're at the gate, how long does it take for the plane to reach the gate, the boarding gate, before you board, and then what's the time between your boarding and your takeoff? So if you've flown before with an airliner, you kind of know these numbers in a way. So let's say it's like the plane gets in like 15 or 20 minutes before the boarding time, and if they get later, then the flight delays.
Yeah.
And then once you board the plane, if you're one of the last people, or if you're the first people to board the plane, then you have like, I don't know, you have like a 20-minute wait until it starts not taking off, but it starts taxiing in the strip. So these numbers give you a reference. Now, another way you could justify is, well, there's, I don't know, like 100, 150 seats on a plane. And you could go into detail for that, but I won't. And let's say 80% of passengers or 60% of passengers have luggage. So you could estimate like how many seconds per case.
Yeah.
It
will take to throw them into the airplane.
Yeah. So you can, and I'm going into a lot of detail here. But the thing is, if you do these triangulations and these checks to your assumption, you're not going to come up with 5 minutes, and you're also not going to come up with 1 hour.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to be on the ballpark.
The best part, in my opinion, about communicating your assumption is that the interviewer then feels like they can help you. So let's say that you're using that approach where you'll say, okay, so we give our luggage to the counter, check-in counter, 40 minutes before takeoff. So it's at least 40 minutes. But then the interviewer, who has flown a lot more than you, can say, no, sometimes I'll give in my bag 20 minutes before because I fly first class and they allow me to do that. And they can say, so after you board the airplane, they still have 20 more minutes. I know that because I can see them from the window. I fly a lot or whatever. And so they can help you, and they'll feel free to help you because they are seeing that you can think already. There's maybe one or two facts that don't matter for the consulting job that you don't know, and so they can give you those facts now that they know you're thinking. Whereas if they don't know that you're thinking, they feel like if they help you, they might be helping someone who is not set for the consulting job to get that right. And I think that the reason that so many candidates make this mistake is because it works in practice. When they're practicing with random candidates.
Oh, in like mock interview practice.
In mock interview practice, it works all the time because the other candidate also has no clue what they're doing. So when you tell me it's 15 minutes, I might think, oh, that's a smart guy. He knows what he's talking about. He knows this weird assumption.
Or maybe they check in the casebook answer and be like, oh, that's close enough. Good.
Yeah. Or maybe they'll Google it and say it's completely wrong. And then you'll both be, okay, so now I know that it's actually 60 minutes, not 15 or whatever.
Yeah.
But they'll hardly ever question your reasoning. And I think that's because maybe they don't know that they should, or maybe because it feels uncomfortable. And
maybe
they just want to do their case. They don't want to make you uncomfortable and create that whole situation. Yeah. They don't want to make you fail.
Yeah, they often they don't feel comfortable assuming the actual role of the interviewer, because it is sometimes there is sometimes a little bit of conflict, right? Mm-hmm. It is a bit uncomfortable to, like, you're practicing with a peer and you don't want to be arrogant to your peer or to be challenging them too much. Yeah. But the interviewer will do that. Mm-hmm. And especially in practice, that's the point, to be challenged, right?
Yeah.
Because then when you're challenged in the interview, you know how to react to that, and you even can avoid challenges because you've been challenged before.
Yeah.
But it's a weird situation because there's this equalness to peers practicing together, mm-hmm. and sometimes they're friends, or sometimes like either they're friends and they don't want to be rude or arrogant or whatever, or colleagues, or they're strangers on the internet.
And so they don't care.
And either you don't care or you want to be extra polite.
Yeah, true.
Right? Because why would I be aggressive to this person? Like, we just met on some random matching platform.
The problem with this, though, is that more and more random practice won't help you. More and more repetitive cases where their assumptions are easy also won't help you.
Yeah.
So it's not such an easy problem that you can just go out there and, do 10 mock interviews and this problem will be fixed.
Yeah.
What you actually need is some variety of cases and either a partner that will challenge you, and you can find that. Like, if you eventually find a partner that's good and that will challenge you, you can practice more with that person. But you can also solve this with solo practice. So you'll take a challenging case, and now that you've seen this episode, now that you've seen this specific mistake, you know that when you get to an assumption, you need at least one in-depth rationale for that assumption. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3. Now, of course, you're not going to need that much in every assumption in the real interview.
That's what I was going to say. It doesn't need to be in-depth for everything. Like, if you need to, like, the average height of a male in the country, like, you can just say, well, I think it's this because experience.
Yeah, but still, like, when you're practicing, you want to go in depth into many, because when the interviewer wants depth, they're going to ask you for it, and then you need to be ready to give it.
Yeah.
Right? So you don't choose the ones you go in depth because they're easier. You actually choose them because they're harder.
Yeah.
And so,
for sure.
Yeah, you give them reasoning behind it. So can I move on to mistake number 6, or do you have more?
No, let's move on.
Okay. So mistake number 6 is getting caught off guard by follow-up questions.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
When you're doing a mock interview with a partner, just a random candidate, they're going to ask you to estimate the number of bubblegum sold in the US every year. You're going to, do your structure. You're going to go top down because you've learned about it. You're going to give reasoning to your assumptions. You're going to get to a fairly reasonable number. Your partner is going to look in the casebook, say, oh, the answer is roughly that. Or they're going to say something else, and you're going to be either happy or sad. Yeah. End of game. What an actual interviewer is going to do is ask you follow-up questions, either in the middle or in the end of the case. Mm-hmm. So let me give you a few examples, because this might be getting too general. Abstract, yeah. So I used to ask 2 really cool questions when I was doing coaching. Those were to see if the candidate really understood the model, and those were also taken from real MBB interviews.
Just a quick note to people who haven't consumed a lot of our content. When Julio says the model, is because an estimation is a model. It's like a forecasting model.
Yeah, exactly.
So it simulates models that you'll do in consulting in Excel and things like that.
Yeah, they're the paper version of the models. Yeah, in a sense.
So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all right. One of the questions that I would ask them is, let's say that your answer is 10x off.
Okay.
Your answer is 10 times bigger than the market or 10 times smaller than the market. What do you think the mistake is?
Okay, and what were you expecting with this question? Because that's a scary question, right? If I get one of those, I'm like, oh, is my answer 10x off? Like,
Yeah.
What did I do wrong? What's the rationale behind it from an interviewer's perspective?
From an interviewer's perspective, they want to see if you know which assumptions are more uncertain.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps if you might have forgotten something, what could it be? So maybe you made an assumption that there's only a B2C market, but there might be a B2B one that might be 9 times bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you made an assumption of consumption that you were really not sure of. And if you found the actual data, it might be true that children consume 10 times less bubblegum than you thought.
Right.
Because you were a super high consumer.
Mm-hmm. I can think of a market where a small percentage of the market pays a price that's 100 times higher, for example. Like usually luxury goods or something like that, and that could shift the answer.
Yeah, could be the case. Like if you're finding the price for, let's say, suits, the average price for suits, you might figure out that luxury actually changes the average price.
Market for suits in central London.
Yes.
Like you think of the average price of a suit, you're used to it, but maybe people who live in central London, I don't know, 5% of them pay 100x more for a suit. I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, this is what I was looking for. Another one is...
And just as context, like when you asked that question, how often were their answer 5 or 10x off?
Half of the answer to this is almost never.
Okay.
I just want to see where the candidate has a problem.
So most times they were exposed to that follow-up question. Their answer was close to the result.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Interesting.
I didn't care if it was off. The other half is sometimes I didn't know. Sometimes I was asking them to estimate a market that I had no idea what the size of the market was.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew what was uncertain in his logic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he should know that as well. He should know where, an assumption is clear, obvious, should probably not very much, and an assumption is uncertain and could be widely different.
Yeah, can I give an example for that? I used to do a case which is like to estimate the market for drones, like commercial drones, not military. So commercial drones in 2030 or 2035 or something. And that's a good example of that. Like, who knows?
Yeah.
But the idea is that you know which parts of your structure or of your model are sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so it might be, population could be different, but the population is not going to be that much different than your prediction.
Exactly. The price could be different, but is it going to be 10x more? Usually price of technology falls. Okay.
Yeah,
so
but maybe people are going to be using drones for something widely different than they're using right now.
Yeah.
So you might have lost that.
Yeah.
Another one that's interesting, that's one I got in that same interview that I told you about in this episode. So I estimated the medical diagnostics market in Brazil. Interviewer turned to me and said, all right, so what do you do with that?
With that number?
Yeah.
Okay, and what did you do with that number?
So basically, before he asked me to estimate this market, he had told me, your client is a private equity firm who's looking to invest in the Brazilian medical diagnostics market, period. Now estimate the size of this market. And then after it ended, he said, what do you do now? I wasn't thoroughly prepared, so I didn't know what he meant. So I said, I don't know, what do you mean? And he told me, well, your client is a private equity firm who's looking to invest in that market. You just estimated the market size. What do you do with that?
Interesting.
And so I had to tell him how I would use that number to figure out if the market was attractive or not. Because in a framework that we didn't make, one of the things we would like to see is if the market is attractive. And one of the branches of seeing if the market is attractive is how large is it?
Okay.
And then compare it to, the results that the fund needs and how big is the markets that they need to invest in.
So basically what he was saying or implying to you is this estimation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like you're in the middle of the project, you just figure this number out. Now, what do you do with it?
Exactly, yes.
What does that mean to the client, or what are your next steps?
Exactly. And the problem with most candidates is they don't know follow-up questions might come up.
Yeah.
And the first thing that this does is throw them off their base. Now they're confused. Now they're scared. Now they don't know what exactly you expect. But there are some types of follow-up questions that interviewers ask. We outline all of them in the Advanced Master Market Sizing course. I don't want to go into that, but just so you understand what they're looking for in general.
Can I give another example? It's one that I got in, I don't know what firm, but I got in an interview at a real firm. Like I had this estimation, I got to the end and everything, but one of the assumptions, it was well reasoned. So I had reasons to put that number in there, and I don't remember the assumption as well. It was something with retail. So I don't know if it's like traffic of people on the streets. I think it's like number of people who get into the store or something like that.
Yeah.
On average, it was a chain of stores, and so I had a good rationale for that.
Yeah.
But it was a sensitive assumption. Like depending on, if the number varied just a little bit, the end result would make the business profitable or unprofitable.
Okay.
And the follow-up question that I got was, how would you make this assumption more precise in a real project? And there was some qualifier, like if you had 2 or 3 days or something like that. And it's an interesting one because it depends on like the problem. Like, do you Google it? Do you go into the stores and count people? Do you estimate the traffic of cars in that street? Like that's and you have some time constraints. So that's another example.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Unrelated story, but that's also fun. When I was doing a project, at some point we had to estimate the size of several stores.
Okay, and that's in a real project, not a case interview.
Yeah, real project.
Yeah.
And I was the person who had to estimate it. And so what I did was we had to choose between 2 methods of estimating the size. One was using an app on the phone where you point somewhere and it tells you how far that thing is. So we would measure the stores as a square and measure the area. The other was counting squares on the ground. The ground's made of those squares that I forget the name.
Tiles.
Yeah, tiles. And we knew the area of those, so I could go into the store and count the tiles. Counting the tiles was more time consuming, but we needed to see if that was actually a lot better. And I had to test it a few times. And as it turns out, counting the tiles was widely better than pointing the phone and seeing the app.
Interesting.
Yeah. But anyway, I just want people to know that interviewers might ask you follow-up questions, and they want to see a few things with those. They want to see if you can check and interpret the number that you got. They want to see if you can understand the fragilities and the strengths of your model, and also the consequences of that model, and also if you can bring that model to reality. Like how would you actually do that, given that reality has a lot more nuances, but also that you have a lot more resources?
Yeah, it also breaks the pattern, right? So
true, yeah.
If you're too trained, like too robotic about it, and like going with the motion that you've practiced through 50 different estimation cases, and then they ask a follow-up question, then they can see if you're thinking or if you're just going through the motions.
Yeah. So anyway, if this is a problem that candidates are facing, I do recommend our advanced market sizing course, but that's only if they've gone through the free course and they feel comfortable with everything else, because follow-up questions, although they are important, they are definitely something that will only be a problem if you're not failing in structuring and assumptions, etc.
Yeah, exactly. It's a more advanced thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll bring mistake number 7, not reality checking your answer.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so what happens to most situations, most cases, most mock interviews for estimations is you structure, if you're good, right? You structure the estimation, you put in some assumptions, you make the calculation, and then you look proudly into your interviewer's eyes and say, this market is a $17 million market. And then silence, right?
At the same time, in your interviewer's mind, they're thinking, player number 3 in this market has a $30 million revenue. That doesn't sound right.
It could, but even if it's right, like even if it is a $17 million market, the thing is you're estimating, right? So you don't know that.
Yeah.
And so you can't say that with too much certainty. Now, you don't want to be, unconfident about it because you did work to get there, but it's an estimation. So what they also expect at the end is a reality check, right? So it's a $17 million market. I got that through this model, which I am not 100% sure it's correct because I can't be. And maybe you as an interviewer know the answer, but in a real project, if we're estimating something because we don't know the answer.
Because no one knows the answer.
Exactly. So they need to see that you can quality check your work. And what is quality checking? In this case, it's checking this number with reality. So you need to compare it with something to be more confident that your work was right versus that you missed a whole branch of drivers to that market that are bigger than the number that you found, for example. So a couple examples. You can find a similar market in type, in size, in consumption. Like it has to be intuitive, right? Because how can you say how similar it is? But if it's like, well, bubblegum, then what's similar to bubblegum? Like maybe mint.
Yeah.
So you have the bubblegum market. It's 17 million in some region. What is the mint market? Or you can compare it with a different geography. So, well, the bubblegum market in this other region that is much bigger is this much. But if we compare the sizes of the population and etc., it's roughly right.
Yeah.
Or you could compare it to the income of the people in that region. So there's this many people, average GDP per capita for this region is around that. And then you realize that people spend 5% of their income on bubblegum. Well, that doesn't seem right?
Yeah.
So just a few ways, and we go into much more depth in the market sizing course, but you need to reality check your answer. The most important step is to do a reality check.
Yeah.
And then the more advanced one is to do a very good reality check that not only shows with more confidence that your number is close to the correct one, but also that shows that you have other skills, because you can use this as opportunities to show other consulting skills as well.
Yeah.
So that's the mistake.
Yeah, I think that people need to understand a little bit how this translates to the real job, because I don't want this to sound like a dogma where it's like, you need to reality check your numbers.
Yeah.
Write this on your hand so you don't forget. No.
Because we said so.
Yeah, because we said so, or because that's what interviewers are looking for. No, that's not the reason.
Yeah.
The reason is, once you're a consultant, you're actually going to do super complex models on Excel that are not going to be auditable at all. And that get to a number that no one has any clue.
Like they're auditable in theory, but no one has time to do that. It's like hundreds of tabs, thousands of...
Yeah, it took you 3 weeks to make the model, and auditing would mean make the model again.
Yeah.
So it's going to take another 3 weeks of another consultant that's also expensive, probably a more expensive consultant than you, because you want to be audited by someone who's a little bit better. So it would take a lot of resources. No one's going to audit. So they want to know that you yourself, not the partner, not the client, you yourself can look at the number and run through it in a few different ways to see if it makes sense. And that's the way you audit your own model. If you can do that, they can trust you to make a model. If you can't, they probably can't trust you, because even if you make 90% of your models right, you're not going to know which 10% are wrong, and that's not something that consulting can bear.
You could also see that happening with clients. Like even when you're senior, like the situation you described is when you're more junior and you have to present to a senior person. But when you're more senior, you have to present it to the client. And let's say you do a forecasting model, typical estimation in a real project. You're forecasting the market size of a certain widget in a certain market.
Yeah.
And you build that forecasting model, and there's tons of assumptions in there because it's forecasting. And then you present it to the client, and then they say, well, I disagree with that. I think it's half of that. And you're like, wow, but we built a model, and look at this model. And first thing, they're not going to look at the model because they don't do that. Most of them don't do that. And it's not even their job. I mean, it could be depending on the situation. And the second thing, they're going to be like, well, I don't care about your fancy model. Like, I have 30 years of experience in this industry. I've seen this over and over again, and I know it's half of that. And how do you argue with that? And one way, it's not the only one. I mean, this is a complicated situation to be in. But one way of dealing with that is to showing a common sense reality check to the client. Like, well, it can't be half because look at this other evidence. Look at these other proxies. Look at these other markets. Look at, and so it can't be half. So, and this evidence points more towards the number we got. Now we can disagree on that, but how can we get to a common ground on that? Because it's not half. I think it's this number, and we have the model. And then doing that, maybe you convince the client to look deeper into the model, or maybe they just say, well, okay, or maybe you find another way to reach common ground. But sometimes if you're too analytical, you can't convince someone who's not interested in looking at your whole analysis. You need to show it in a more intuitive way.
And I think that it's pretty clear to them now that they need to reality check. Sometimes the reality check is going to be a follow-up question. Like if you don't check your model, the interviewer might ask you, so what do you think of this number?
They usually do that.
Right? And many people think that that's a clue for them to check their math. And they'll check all of their math. Now, it's not a bad idea to make sure your math is right. But what they actually want to see is if you can look at that number and evaluate it through a different lens to reality check it. Again, I don't want to dive into all the ways to reality check, but in our advanced market sizing course, we do show several techniques. My favorite one being the double attack technique, where we teach you not only how to make sure that you always have one or a couple good reality checks, but also how to show skills that make you different in that specific step where most people are simply going to, kind of skip.
Or they'll say like, oh, I think this number is great. Like this is the most common answer.
Or they'll give a simple reality check, whereas you could have been a star candidate at that moment.
True.
All right. Now is it my turn to give another mistake?
It's your turn,
All right, so my next mistake number 8, is getting stuck right at the start.
Okay.
This is
sounds
scary.
terrible.
This is a scary thing. It's actually pretty deadly when it happens. Like, interviewer asks you to estimate the number of whatever the average market size of bubblegum, and you just blank. You have no idea how to proceed.
Well, you're usually, if you've prepared a little bit, you're not gonna blink with that one.
Okay, of course they're not, but
can I give an example of one that you would? Estimate the number of Nespresso pods or capsules for the B2B market. Blank.
Right. So you have no idea how to attack that.
Even though you know for B2C, like, oh, it's easy. How many people have Nespresso and blah, blah, blah.
Then you blank. You don't know how to start. That's pretty deadly. This is also not as common. The most common way this appears is you come up with a structure. It's not that good, but you can work with it. And the interviewer says, nah, I don't like that. I don't like it.
Come up with another one.
Come up with another one. I don't want that one. And you might fight. You might say, no, but this is good, but this is this and that. And they'll say, no, I don't want it.
Because sometimes by design, they give an estimation that's easy or that's common. And by design, they know 99% of candidates will give the common template type of structure. And then they will, on purpose, design that case to always say no to that template structure to see if you can come up with a second one.
Could be. It could also be that they know that there's one assumption in that path that you'll not find.
That's true. That's true.
And they know it because they know that problem really well, and also because they're consultants, so they can do all of the tough skills and make the structure quickly in their mind and know which is the most flawed assumption that you're gonna get to.
And so they're trying to help you, but
you end up blanking because you weren't prepared for that.
yeah, it's tough.
And this can derail a whole interview. You really don't want this to happen
Right.
at all. Now, I want to talk about solutions to this, so you're
Okay.
not stuck being, no, this doesn't work. No, this doesn't work. I don't know. So the thing is, you want to be able to structure different kinds of estimations in several ways, not only one. So when you come up with one that doesn't work, you can come up with a different one. You can come up with a different one. Eventually, you can come up with several, and you can know what are the pros and cons of each one. You can see which are the flawed assumptions or the assumptions you can't get to. And maybe you can present that to the interviewer and tell them, if I know this data, then I can move on to this path. If I know this data, I can do this. You know, if I know the number of gyms and size of gyms, blah, blah, blah. But if I know how many people use personal trainers, then blah, blah, blah.
Was it you who got, I don't know if it's you or one of our clients, but someone got a case at Bain, which was to estimate the number of people who use the subway system of a city. I don't know if it's São Paulo or not, but number of people who go through the metro or the subway system of a city. But the question was not to come up with a number, but to come up with as many different approaches as possible.
Really? No, I haven't heard
You
that.
haven't? So
No.
it was a client of ours. And I thought it was just such a clever way to create a case, because like you don't care about assumptions or math, like just how many approaches can you create?
Yeah. And I think the solution to this, the way you make sure that this doesn't happen, is you work on a few fronts. So you practice with varied types of estimations. You practice with not only the consumer goods, not only the B2B, not only the stock, the number of one thing that exists. You work with as many as you can. Now, that's a tough thing to do as a beginner. I get that. I won't have a really good solution for you other than using our advanced course, because
We created for it. Yeah.
we created it because this problem existed.
Yeah.
The other part of the solution is finding several different ways for each one of those. Different ways to size the same market. Again, no simple solution for this. It's easier to do as a beginner because you get a problem and you try to structure it in 3-4 different ways. It's also something that we solve in our advanced course.
Yeah, so we have there the 5 common types of estimations, which gives you the best way to structure the 5 common types of estimation, which are like 80% of estimation cases. Then we have the 4 ways to size a market, which is like 4 different approaches to size any market.
Yeah.
So you get some flexibility on your approach. And then we have non-traditional and partner level drills, which are all non-traditional estimation cases that don't fit these 5 common types and 4 ways to size a market,
And
to give people variety.
Precisely. And there's also one new video that I put in there, which is how to combine all of those skills and all of that library that you've built in your mind to solve super tough estimations that don't have a clearly good path.
Interesting.
I brought it because a client sent me an email asking how should they structure an estimation of number of pilots, airplane pilots in the world.
Okay.
And I could see that there were several different paths to solve that. None were clearly good. All had bad cons. And so I created for her and then for everyone else this one video where I explain how do you combine all of your skills to solve that problem, or at least to show the interviewer that despite not being able to solve that one problem, you will be a good consultant.
Makes sense. Like I can see, for example, for commercial airliners, you could use the 5 common types.
Yeah.
But then if you put in cargo pilots,
military,
you have private pilots, then it's tough. Yeah.
And the interviewer could segment that. They could say, oh, no, forget about airlines.
I want to know cargo.
Or I want to know military.
Yeah.
They could do that. And with that video, you learn how to combine all of those advanced skills into the super partner level skill of actually getting yourself out of any situation, even unestimatable items.
Cool. But even if they don't take the course, they need to work with variety.
Variety and different approaches.
And they can create their own variety if they want, right? So it's like an espresso. Well, what about B2B? And then that's a case. And then you practice with that. Or like pilots. Well, let me try airliners, but then let me try cargo. Let me try private pilots, military.
Yeah. And I think that they can also, instead of creating their own variety, if they can't, or aside from that, they can rule out the everyday stuff. You know, if they find a new estimation that's similar to everything they've been seeing all day, then they just cannot do that. Rule that out. Maybe try changing it a little bit, like you said, but they know it's the same, so don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That's all I got for this mistake.
Last mistake, 9th common mistake in market sizing questions is not taking estimations seriously.
Like you did.
Like I did, exactly. I brought this as the last one to connect the beginning of the episode with the end of the episode. So what I see as a pattern and what happened to me is that when you start out your case prep journey, you usually give estimations some thought, some practice.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit scary at first, because you don't, like, it's the simplest type of case to start solving. So you can solve some estimation cases and then move on to harder, more complex types, like strategy cases or profitability cases. And that's fine, right? Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
I actually think it's a great way to start.
Me too. It's actually how we started with our coaching clients. First session was always estimations, and sometimes the second as well. But what people don't realize, and let me take that hook, with our coaching clients, usually the 10th or 12th session was estimations again. Remember that?
Yeah.
Because I think it's a fine way. You start with basic estimations, you know, those that you see everywhere. Then you start doing more complex cases, strategy cases, profitability cases, public sector cases, operations cases, because you will need to be able to solve those. But then you forget about estimations. Most people do. They say, oh, it's for beginners, or, you know, I'm having a lot of trouble with these things. And then you go to the final round, or even to tier 1 firms' first rounds, and the estimations are way harder than the ones you learned at first.
Right.
So you're not taking them seriously in your prep, and chances are you're going to get one of the hard ones. And when I say chances are, I don't mean 100% of people, but I'd say for people who are interviewing with 2 or 3 firms, especially at the high level, and getting to final rounds, I'd say at least 70, 80% of people will get one very tough estimation. And it's hard for people to do them because they have never seen that stuff before, right? They've never considered that estimations can be hard.
Yeah.
And they can. And partners love to test you on the basics, on the fundamentals. So I always use that example of those chef reality shows on TV or Netflix, or where there's like chefs testing young cooks, or even Michelin-starred chefs testing other chefs. And what I find amazing about those is that very often the chefs don't, like, sometimes they do like difficult recipes, like, what's the name of that filet mignon with like a crust of
I forget about it. I'll remember that name.
Yeah, there's some really tough dishes that they ask you to do, like classic dishes from French cuisine, but sometimes they just ask you to do like pasta with tomato sauce. Yeah. Nothing else. And they really like to test you on the basics.
Yeah.
Because if you can cook pasta with tomato sauce and it tastes amazing, then you're cut to be a chef, right? But if you can only do tasty food with fancy ingredients and stuff, then you're probably not that good at the fundamentals. And it's kind of the same thing with partners in consulting firms. Sometimes they want to test I wouldn't say basics, but the fundamentals at a very deep level.
Yeah.
And one of the ways they do that is with estimations. The other way is with complex brainstorming questions. Maybe we should do an episode about that.
Yeah.
Because no one talks about it, and they do like 20-minute long brainstorming questions, and it has nothing to do with the brainstormings from the first rounds. But back to estimations. They like that. They want to see, like, can they estimate anything? Like, not to the precise number, but can they model any model? Like,
as a figure here, how many partner estimations case did you get in your interviews? How many of the partner cases you did were estimations?
Both the first time and the second time I applied?
Yeah.
I think it was at least 4, but maybe 5.
Yeah.
I'd have to recall all the interviews, but yeah.
And in a sense, I think that estimations...
And often they were the only question.
Yeah. I think that estimations are a great way to test whether someone's going to be a good consultant if you only have one shot, because it forces the person to show a complex math structure to a complex mathematical problem, but also make assumptions explicit, guide someone through the solution of a complex problem, possibly disagree on small parts of the problem while having the whole, or having the whole structure, disagree on the whole structure, but not having to discuss the minutiae. And
they were hard, man. Like, I'll mention a few of the estimation questions I got at final round at MBB firms. I had number of new apartments or condos or apartment units being built per year in my city.
Yeah.
Super tough. Like, try to do it at home. It's really, really hard. Then I had the printing costs for the head office of a large commercial bank.
Yeah.
Super hard. I had the call center for the luxury car brand that I mentioned, and that's in our free course. I had to estimate the synergies of 2 beer manufacturers, and I had some data, but not everything.
Yeah.
And I had to actually come up with a number for, like, what is the synergy number, and all the drivers and stuff. And let me see. That's what I can remember. So at least these 4, but I sense there was a 5th, but I don't recall it right now. But yeah, these are hard. These are not like, how many cars are sold in your city, you know?
Yeah. And also, I think that there's a second problem, not necessarily a problem, but a second issue with not taking estimations seriously enough is estimations might just be the skill that's most transferable from case interviews to any job that you have in the corporate world. I remember a friend that once told me that after I taught him, because when we were doing coaching, that was all I talked about.
Yeah.
After I taught him our approach to estimations, he said that his modeling improved a lot because he was able to discuss the model with his boss before creating the model.
Interesting.
He was able to create the model on paper before putting it on Excel, so he knew where he was going. He was able to check that model easily to see if it was better. And I just got an email a couple of days ago from a client that was a master market sizing student. They didn't get any MBB interviews. They failed before. But, well, they had already prepared. They started preparing before. And I talked to this guy a bit because I was going to Lebanon, so I asked him for tips. And then a while after, he emailed us saying he just got an offer at a whatever firm he was interviewing. It's not a consulting firm, but he got a market sizing. And he said that it was just second nature to him. He didn't even feel like he was doing an interview.
Cool. It's even transferable to entrepreneurship. Like, every entrepreneur I know, even those like boomer, like 60-year-olds who've been entrepreneurs their whole lives and didn't have formal education or anything, like they're always doing napkin math.
Yeah.
And which is basically what estimations are at a basic level. And like every entrepreneur that I know is assessing opportunities either in different businesses or in their own business, like at a snap, like very quickly through estimations to see if it's even worth their time. So it's a cool skill to have. I agree.
So I guess final thought here is, if you have a weakness on estimation, don't forget about it. Don't brush it over. Don't push it under the rug.
Yeah.
Estimations are something that you're gonna find, and it's kind of a low-hanging fruit. Like with a few techniques and with a little bit of set-specific practice, you can actually get this problem out of your.
It's simple to learn if you have the right method. It's like, unlike analysis or even structuring, it's a little harder.
Yeah.
Estimations are more straightforward to learn. Just need the right concepts, the right strategies, and some practice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
So these are the 9 common mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And
cool.
Thank you for this one. I'll see you in the next one.
And this is a long one, but we will have clips, right?
Yeah, of course.
Which I don't know if it makes sense to talk at the end of the episode, because whoever's watching this has watched it already. But
yeah, oh, that's good enough.
All right, cool.
All right, bye.
See ya, Julio.